Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1952's Without Warning, directed by Arnold Lavin. Many people consider serial murder a modern phenomenon, and that's an incorrect assumption. Serial murderers existed as long as society has, and up until the last quarter of the past century, was usually referred to as mass murder. The definition now, however, is different. Serial killing is defined as the unlawful killing of two or more victims in separate events with what is referred to as a cooling-off period between, whereas mass murder or spree killing is defined as the murder of two or more victims in the same area within the same event. This cooling-off period can last from days to years, depending on the psychopathy of the killer. I myself think of mass murder as the act of taking out many people, usually strangers, at the same time in one place, like the San Ysidro McDonald's incident in 1984, and likened spree killing to what Howard Unruh or Charles Starkweather pulled back in the 50s. The first generally recognized serial killing, the first one recorded as such anyway, was the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, London, England in the late 1880s. The idea that these were the first serial killings is absurd, of course, but they were the first to gain international attention. If you go to the FBI website, there's a fairly lengthy but fascinating article written after the Behavioral Science Unit held a symposium on serial murder in San Antonio, Texas, between late August and early September in 2005. It examines in detail what constitutes serial killing and points out many misconceptions both the general public and law enforcement have about the people who commit such crimes. Most of the info I'm about to impart comes from that very report. I could go through the entire report, and as a result, this intro would run about an hour or so, so I'll give you the salient points of the report, starting with the myths. The first one that seems to be the most popular is that serial killers are all dysfunctional loners. This is absolutely not true. Many, if not most, serial killers are people able to keep up a respectable, even dull existence. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, was married and had 2 kids, was a Boy Scout leader, served honorably in the U.S. Air Force, was employed as a local government official, and was president of his church. The Green River killer, Gary Ridgway, was married 3 times, attended church regularly, and often quoted and discussed the Bible. The second, that serial killers are all white males, is ridiculous as well. There are serial killers of all races. Serial killers are divided into 2 types, organized and disorganized. An example of an organized one who carefully planned out his crimes, is Ted Bundy. He would slip a fake cast on his arm and troll for victims, typically pretty young girls with long dark hair parted down the middle, and chat them up before asking them to help him with loading something into his car. Once he got into his car, which he parked in a place where he wouldn't be observed, he would handcuff them to the inside of the car and kidnap them, taking them to a secluded place where he could rape and murder them at his leisure. Disorganized killers, ones who commit crimes of opportunity like Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, would kill without any planning. This dumbass was a hypochondriac who believed his blood was turning to dust in his veins, and to that end would go from house to house until he found an unlocked door. He later explained in an interview with FBI profiler Robert Ressler that he took locked doors as a sign that he wasn't welcome, but considered an unlocked door as an invitation to enter the house. He'd then go inside and butcher whoever he ran into before drinking their blood to replenish his own. He was usually covered in blood when he left, but somehow managed to elude capture long enough to murder 6 people. He was caught because he left perfect handprints and footprints in the blood of his last victims. Another myth is that they're all evil geniuses. This assumption usually put forth by movies. This idea really took hold after 1991's The Silence of the Lambs was released. The idea of a brilliant, seemingly all-knowing cannibal killer became an incredibly popular image. This particularly annoyed FBI agent John Douglas, on whom the character Jack Crawford was based. He remembered that, upon meeting Anthony Hopkins, the actor playfully pretended to bite Douglas's wife's neck, which caused her to swoon a bit. What made him angry was the fact that women found the character of Hannibal Lecter sexy. a fact that Douglas knew was not only ridiculous but extremely dangerous. This seems to be an idea that many people have about serial killers. There's a page on Facebook I follow called Serial Killers, the Animals of Society. It has links to interesting, informative articles and such, and having a scholarly interest in true crime, I enjoy perusing it. However, there are some posters there that really disturb me, and not in a good way. I've noticed they're women mostly, but not all of them are. They post about Bundy or Rodriguez and others of that ilk, talking about how hot they are. Anytime I see one of these posts, I feel this irresistible urge to take these morons to task. These cretins they're romanticizing are murderers, for God's sake. Your love wouldn't reform them or save them. They'd play you just like they played all their other victims, and eventually you'd end up eviscerated or beheaded after being raped multiple times with barbed wire. This imbecilic idea that they're romantic figures that refuse to be held down by society's rules is so wrong-headed that it absolutely boggles my mind. These people have absolutely no idea how terrifying, degrading, and horrendous being murdered, much less by a serial killer, can be. The reality is so far removed from the fantasy that it's life-changing. One example, which I found on the IMDb, says that after working with John Douglas for some time researching his role for The Silence of the Lambs, Scott Glenn thanked him and said how fascinating it was to have been allowed into his world. Douglas laughed and told Glenn that if he really wanted to get into his world, he should listen to an audio tape of serial killers Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris torturing, raping, and murdering 2 teenage girls. Glenn listened to less than 1 minute of the tape and has since said that he feels he lost a sense of innocence in doing so, and that he has never been able to forget what he heard. These animals are not romantic or rebellious. They're murderers with no sense of guilt or remorse or humanity. They're not anyone to be admired or revered. They're animals that deserve nothing more than to be eradicated like the mad dogs they are. Okay, that said, let's talk about tonight's movie. Although several reviews and sites classify this movie as noir, it's not, strictly speaking. It's missing the usual tropes of noir, those being femme fatales, doomed heroes, and lots of shadows. It's actually more of a police procedural, kind of like Dragnet without the dour presence of Joe Friday. It's actually closer to 1948's The Naked City in that it's shot mostly on location, this time in LA instead of New York. It's a surprisingly suspenseful film. To tell you the truth, I wasn't expecting much from this movie, and I have to thank my friend Kross for suggesting it. Unlike one of my other friends, he recognizes a good movie when he sees one. The plot of the movie is as follows. A serial killer is stabbing attractive young blondes to death with gardening shears, although the police aren't wise to what weapon he's using just yet. This is the second such murder in a month, and the police are naturally anxious to catch this guy before he kills again. Unfortunately, this guy actually put some thought into his killings. He's careful to cover his tracks and not get all messy committing his crimes. The detectives trying to catch him always seem to be a couple of steps behind, and this was a new thing in procedural films, they get a good amount of help from the forensic scientists. They try putting female police officers out as decoys in an attempt to trap him, but that doesn't work out very well. This is a really good movie, very well acted, directed, and very suspenseful. It's definitely a B movie, as it only runs about 80 minutes or so, but it's a good use of that time. Adam Williams was born Adam Berg on November 26, 1922 in Wall Lake, Iowa. He appeared in 110 projects, mostly television shows, and then mostly as a bad guy. He's probably best remembered for his role as Valerian in Alfred Hitchcock's 1959 classic North by Northwest, although he played many other roles in many other movies and TV shows, including 1953's The Big Heat and 1957's Fear Strikes Out. He also authored teleplays for The Rifleman and M Squad. He received the Navy Cross as a pilot in World War II. Adam Williams died of lymphoma on December 4, 2006 in Los Angeles, California. Edward Binns was born on September 12, 1916 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's one of those actors whose face is instantly recognizable, although you couldn't put a name to that face if you tried. This isn't surprising, as he appeared in over 170 movies and television shows over the course of his 4-decade career. After graduating Pennsylvania University, he became an apprentice at the Cleveland Playhouse, where he learned his trade. He became one of the first members of the Actors Studio in 1947, and made his Broadway stage debut soon after, eventually appearing as Detective Gallagher in Detective Story. His first credited movie role was in 1951's Teresa as Sergeant Brown, and then he went on to appear in many TV series, usually as a cop or army officer of some sort. He also appeared in 1957's 12 Angry Men as Juror 6, and 1964's Failsafe as Colonel Grady. While he never achieved true stardom, he worked steadily except for a few years when he was blacklisted as a communist sympathizer during the McCarthy witch hunts of the 50s. It turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. A broken alderwoman with the same surname was the actual member of the Communist Party. That was cleared up after a couple of years, no surprise there, as the government at that time was quick to accuse but slow to admit they'd make a mistake. Things haven't changed all that much, have they? His last on-screen appearance was as Monsignor Frank Bartlett in 1988's After School. Edward Binns died of a heart attack on December 4th, 1990 in Brewster, New York. Without Warning is a good movie. I always enjoyed police procedural movies, as I am interested in both sides of true crime, and it's not as deadpan as Dragnet. The detectives in this film, at the very least, have a sense of humor. It never drags and is quite suspenseful, especially near the end when they close in on the killer. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Without Warning, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.